If you want to understand why South Africans do not bend easily, why pressure does not silence them, and why hardship has never erased their will, then this video is for you. This is not politics or emotion. It is history, conditioning, and identity. Today, we trace where the South African spirit was forged and why it still refuses to surrender. South Africans, across generations and backgrounds, are known for an almost immovable resilience. This reputation did not appear by chance. This resilience is not bravado and not mythology. It is the product of long historical conditioning, shaped by rebellion, sacrifice, and an ingrained refusal to surrender what is believed to be rightfully theirs. South Africa was not born in comfort, it was born in resistance. To understand why South Africans refuse to give up today, we must trace the deep historical arc that shaped the nation's character. South Africa's early European settlers were not empire builders sent to conquer on behalf of distant crowns. They were ordinary men and women fleeing domination, religious coercion, and economic suffocation in Europe. They endured months at sea under brutal conditions. Disease, storms, hunger, and uncertainty were constant companions long before they ever saw land. When they arrived, they faced an unknown and untamed land. There was no safety net, no protection, and no guarantee of survival. Every day required effort, courage, and adaptation. This was not migration of convenience. It was an act of rebellion. Leaving Europe was a conscious rejection of control, taxation, and imposed authority. From the beginning, survival depended on self-reliance. Communities learned quickly that submission meant extinction, while independence meant survival. The nation's foundational identity was forged not through obedience, but through resistance. At the Cape of Good Hope, Dutch settlers, and later British authorities, attempted to impose centralized control, taxation, and foreign legal systems. Political pressure increased, cultural traditions were marginalized, economic freedom was restricted, and land ownership became contested. Forced conscription and legal domination followed. What had been a struggle for survival became a struggle for autonomy. Rather than submit, the Boers chose the unknown. They packed their lives into ox wagons and turned their backs on imposed authority. The Great Trek was not an escape. It was a declaration. Freedom would be pursued, even at the cost of comfort, safety, and certainty. In the interior, they faced hostile terrain, disease, isolation, and repeated conflict. Yet they survived and built independent republics. This period carved a permanent lesson into the national psyche. Freedom is preserved only by those willing to walk away from comfort and fight for autonomy. As Boer republics took shape inland, the British Empire followed. Gold and diamonds transformed the land into a strategic prize. Two major wars erupted, pitting a small agrarian people against the most powerful empire on earth. In the First Anglo-Boer War, guerrilla tactics defined resistance. Local knowledge, mobility, and marksmanship allowed a small force to challenge a global empire. These tactics laid the foundation for future South African military doctrine, emphasizing adaptability, discipline, and unconventional warfare. The Second Anglo-Boer War escalated brutally. Scorched-earth policies were introduced to break civilian resistance. Farms were burned and livelihoods destroyed, while women and children were placed in concentration camps to force surrender. Civilian suffering reached an unprecedented scale, and survival demanded endurance not only on the battlefield, but within families and communities themselves. Despite overwhelming odds, resistance continued, permanently embedding sacrifice, moral stubbornness, and endurance into the South African identity. South Africa's participation in World War I and World War II extended this culture of sacrifice beyond its borders. South African soldiers were deployed to Europe and North Africa, where they encountered industrialized warfare on a massive scale. Those who returned came home, disciplined, hardened and deeply shaped by global conflict, carrying lessons that reinforced a generational truth. Even when global forces seem overwhelming, cohesion and resolve still matter. Even smaller, often overlooked conflicts reinforce this identity. During the Korean War, South African pilots and personnel served with distinction, facing high-risk aerial combat and the demands of coalition warfare far from home. Distance did not weaken duty, and each conflict further strengthened a national character built on resilience, responsibility, and resolve. From 1966 to 1989, South Africa fought a continuous 23-year conflict against communist expansion in southern Africa, one of the longest wars of the modern era. This was not a single-front war, but a multi-layered conflict involving Angola, Cuba, the Soviet Union, SWAPO, and coordinated ANC terrorist attacks against civilian targets inside South Africa. The South African Defence Force was vastly outnumbered, often estimated at ratios of 20 to 1, facing enemies supplied with advanced weapons, armor, and foreign military support. At the same time, South Africa was placed under severe international pressure. The United States and Europe imposed economic and political sanctions, isolating the country while the war intensified. Inside South Africa, mandatory conscription was enforced. Young men were called up at 17 or 18 years old, served 2 full years of active duty, and then faced repeated 3-month operational deployments to Angola and Namibia for up to 8 additional years. Many were transformed into combat-experienced veterans before the age of 20. This war did more than train soldiers. It conditioned an entire generation to operate under extreme pressure, constant uncertainty, and moral complexity. Discipline became instinctive. Vigilance became normal. Resistance became automatic. A mindset was forged that did not rely on comfort or stability, but on readiness, endurance, and responsibility. South Africa was not shaped by a single conflict, but by continuous resistance across generations. Colonial domination, imperial warfare, global wars, and ideological battles. Each era reinforced the same lesson. Sovereignty is never given freely, it must be defended. The result was a nation psychologically trained to resist unfairness, reject coercion, and question imposed authority, often without consciously knowing why. When the guns eventually fell silent, the warrior instinct did not disappear. It required a new outlet. Rugby became that outlet. On the field, physical confrontation replaced combat, discipline replaced drill, and strategy replaced battlefield maneuvers. For South Africans, rugby is not entertainment, it is symbolic warfare. The Springboks are not merely a team, they are defenders of national honor. Modern gladiators carrying embedded historical memory onto the field. From early childhood, this culture is reinforced. Physical resilience is encouraged. Mental toughness is expected. Loyalty to team, community, and nation is instilled. Rugby echoes lessons inherited from history. Stand your ground, protect your own, and never retreat without cause. These principles are absorbed long before they are consciously understood. This deeply embedded war culture manifests today in modern life in unexpected ways. South Africans instinctively question authority, demand transparency, resist corruption and injustice, and defend their investments, property, and livelihoods. History taught them that silence equals loss, and that rights not defended are rights surrendered. In financial reality, the same rule applies. If you do not fight to protect your investments, you will lose them. Financial systems reward vigilance, not blind trust. Transparency must be demanded, not expected. This mindset is not paranoia. It is historical wisdom earned through centuries of struggle, sacrifice, and survival. South Africans refused to give up because giving up was never an option. From ocean crossings to scorched-earth wars, from teenage soldiers to modern gladiators on the rugby field, this nation was forged in resistance. The instinct to fight for fairness, transparency, and ownership is not learned, it is inherited. When South Africans stand their ground, they are not being difficult. They are being who history trained them to be. Give me 20 divisions of American soldiers, and I will breach Europe. Give me 15 divisions of Englishmen, and I will advance to the borders of Berlin. Give me 2 divisions of those marvelous fighting Boers, and I will remove Germany from the face of the earth. These words, spoken by Field Marshal Bernard L. Montgomery during World War II, acknowledge a fighting spirit forged long before modern wars ever began. Throughout history, outsiders have struggled to understand the South African fighting spirit. Many try to define it in simple terms: duty, ideology, nationalism, or fear. Yet again and again, observers reach the same conclusion. South Africans, and especially the Boers, fight differently. Not for conquest, not for medals, not for applause, but because resistance itself is part of who they are. American General George Guts and Glory Patton once described it bluntly. He said, "Americans fight for a free world, the English for honor and medals the French, and Canadians decide too late that they must participate. The Italians are too afraid to fight, the Russians have no choice, and the Germans fight for the fatherland." Then he paused and said the Boers fight for the hell of it. That statement was not an insult. It was recognition of a mindset forged beyond logic or ideology. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, reflecting on the same people, explained it more precisely. He described a community formed from Dutch resistance fighters who held out for decades against the greatest empire of their time, blended with French Huguenots who abandoned everything rather than surrender their faith. He noted how these people were shaped by generations of warfare, harsh land, dangerous animals, and constant survival, developing unmatched skill with weapons, horses, and terrain. Conan Doyle concluded that when these traits were tempered by Old Testament fatalism and a fierce patriotism, the result was inevitable. One of the most rugged, unconquerable fighting peoples the world has ever seen. Not created by theory, but by pressure. Not trained by institutions, but by history itself. That same spirit did not disappear with time. It evolved. It moved from battlefields into culture, sport, business, finance, and daily life. The instinct to resist unfairness, to question authority, to defend what is earned, and to refuse exploitation is not taught. It is inherited. South Africans do not push back because they are difficult. They push back because history taught them the cost of silence. At Jazara for All, we carry that same responsibility. We will not bow, bend, or break to serve narratives that weaken our people. We do not promote false hope, fantasy, or sensationalism. We share information grounded in reality, structure, and historical truth, so that people can make informed decisions for themselves. We inform, you choose. This library exists to preserve clarity, not comfort. If this series helped you understand why South Africans stand their ground, in life, in finance, and in principle, then you already understand the spirit that shaped this nation.